Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavoston, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm Mischievous Marcinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man as well, including the annuals. But Dan, as far as I'm concerned, the annuals don't count.
Well, Mark, I'm sick again, but that's not going to stop us from Spider Talking. So welcome, everybody, to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. And I discover what medicines are still in my medicine cabinet that I haven't yet devoured. But thank you all for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
I just hope you don't have radioactive ibuprofen, Dan. If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show. Because, let's just spread the love and get us out there and have more people listening to us, right? I mean, what could go wrong?
I could think of many things, but I won't go down that road today. This podcast, on the other hand, in all of its wonder, exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep this podcast going, which of course you want to do, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon, where all the episodes of Season 6 are going up several weeks early. Yes, you're listening to this, and Season 6 exists on the Patreon. So go there, and you can get several episodes of Season 6 already. Plus, you'll get interviews with some of our favorite Spider-Man creators that we haven't included in the main feed. Today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 23. This issue is written by Zeb Wells. The interior and cover pencils are by John Romita Jr., inks are by Scott Hanna, colors by Marcio Menyz, and of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on April 5th, 2023. Mark, why don't you hit us with a recap of this issue?
Absolutely, Dan. We opened sometime between a year and 18 months ago. Who really knows anymore? Beefcakey Peter is burying his costume to cover his tracks and probably looking for a party animal muscle midriff tank to put on, but alas, he needs to get back to New York City and find out what's going on with MJ back in that alternate dimension. Peter's in bad shape, and not just because he was stuck in Pennsylvania, though let's be honest, I'm sure being there didn't help. Phillies fans, am I right? Peter steals some clothes, but he has to take public transit back to the city before he suddenly becomes that Robin Williams "What year is it?" gif with some stranger at the Port Authority. And honestly, given what New York City has become under de Blasio and Adams, is anyone truly surprised by a disheveled guy in the Port Authority asking what day it is? Peter catches up with Aunt May, and she lets him know that only a day has passed since she last saw him and MJ, when Peter thinks it's been at least a week. That's when Norman Osborn shows up, and he just wants to make sure Peter is okay, before Peter nearly puts him through a wall. Norman doesn't punch back, but does notice the spider transponder in Peter's front pocket. I guess we're just going to have to put in Pitt in that for later. So on to the Baxter building to find Reed Richards, but instead Pete gets captured by some tentacles, and Johnny Storm and the Thing are telling him to calm down. Peter starts rambling about an evil mathematician, and honestly, what I love about comics is that this is probably like the 8th weirdest thing these guys have heard all day. All the same, Ben and Johnny are sympathetic, but can't let Peter into Reed's lab until Captain America shows up, because they need to figure out why there was an extra-dimensional explosion in York, Pennsylvania. And if Peter doesn't like that, he can go pound sand, or kick rocks, or get beat up. Reader, you pick. So Peter takes off and notices some helicopters in the sky, just like he's Henry Hill at the end of Goodfellas, and Jump into the Fire is pulsating in the background. Peter is desperate to find an ally who's alive when Cap himself shows up, and again, he's here to help, but only if Peter is willing to wait around like he's trying to renew his driver's license at the DMV. And honestly, who has time for that? Especially someone whose girlfriend is stuck in an alternate dimension with an evil mathematician hell-bent on sacrificing her. So Peter, of course. So Peter does what any rational person would do and grabs Cap's shield and smashes it against his face. Cap is all like, I understand why you tried to break my face in 1,000 places, but I still need to see 3 forms of ID, despite the fact that this could all be handled more efficiently online. That brings us to Peter scaling outside a building and busting through where he warns the occupant to stop talking and listen. The occupant, naturally, Norman Osborn.
Bravo, Mark. Bravo. I got to call back to that party animal midriff tank, because I was out on a date with my wife the other day, and we went to this little kid shop, and there, right at the entrance, was a little kid shirt with white in stark lettering, party animal, and I had to have it. My poor son is going to be rocking the Peter Parker do from the mid-'80s. Man, it's going to be hysterical, at least for me.
I think you posted that somewhere on some social media account, which kind of put the bug in my head. But then when I saw it in this comic, I was like, I got to go there. And of course, that's JR doing it then, and JR doing it now. And you know, we all know that he would look fantastic in a midriff tank top. So let's just go with it, right? I don't know. I'm getting weird. I'm sorry, Dan. I'm sorry. Let's talk about the comic.
You're simping on JR, which is easy to do. But
I mean, he's a beautiful man from Long Island. What do you want from me, Dan?
Great. Beautiful men from Long Island think alike. Anyway,
yeah, exactly.
So I think there's really no way to talk about this comic without like talking about the kind of like core like essence of it, which is like the pace of this comic. I think even Nick Lowe on Twitter said like, get ready for the quickest read this week, you know? And it's not that this thing is lacking content. It's just, man, the way it's written, the way it's drawn, like everything builds this rocket fire pace to like, just the book flies. You are moving quickly through it. I mean, Peter's narration is quick and to the point, and you know the art is like pushing you forward with different like you know camera angles and the way that the it reads on the page is liquid smooth, and there's a lot of motion like pushing you in certain directions. You know, it's like there's no time to waste. And to me, this is a great setup for tension and a classic Spider-Man trope of, I got to save the day no matter what it costs me, and I got no time to spare. And I love that about this issue.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Dan, in my recap, I you know, in addition to getting like my obligatory like late 80s, early 90s reference with like the Goodfellas, Henry Hill jump into the fire sequence where the I'm sure you know the scene I'm talking about. There's the elephant falling out of the sky and he's looking up. I mean, but like that's what this issue felt like. It was real. Like it's just like this like kind of pulsating, tense. High octane. You're not quite sure. I mean, you're kind of in Peter's frenetic state of mind because he's just like, you know, I think both the art and just the overall pacing of like how we're going from thing to thing and like each obstacle being put before him. And it's just like, you know, like this is a friend, but the friend is not looking to cooperate. And it's like, how is, you know, and I will say this outright, you know, like I'm finally coming around to the idea of how this whole thing has been structured from the get-go, which is this now the mystery box is paying off, because the thing is we know from the first issue way back that Peter is now on the outs with all these people. So when you start seeing these confrontations happen, including the confrontation with Norman Osborn, which we know is the one relationship that gets turned around, you're just like, aha, you know what I mean? Like it just adds to the tension because you know, like even if the bad outcome doesn't happen in this specific comic, like decisions are being made in real time in this comic that are going to be for the worse for Peter. And that just adds a layer of tension and drama that we really haven't had in a Spider-Man comic in a while, and I was really riveted by it. I thought this was as tense and intense of a comic that we've had in a really long time.
Well, I'm really eager to talk about the what did Peter do of it all in the second half of this show. For me, the most like devastating moment in this comic are like the page and a half where Peter makes the realization about the time difference between his world and Xibalba, which, seems to be about like a 1 to 7 difference. Like he says like it felt like it was a week, but everybody seems to be referencing about a day ago. And that moment to me, it's like devastating and drives like the rest of this issue. Like talk about an inciting incident, because like until that moment, Peter's it's not that he's not running, right? He runs away from the police. He doesn't know where he is, but he takes the time to steal clothes and get on the transit and take it into New York. But once he makes that realization that, of this high concept, idea of the time dilation, it launches him into action, and it creates this incredibly high tension, which makes you really care about every detail. Like every little hurdle for him is adding on an exponential amount of time. And so, the little, like all the details, every panel feels like a hesitation. And I thought that was really great. And I think, it's cool when a high concept like this, be it the Mayan gods or whatever it is, like there's a lot that's baked in here. But when you can explore it from multiple different facets, whether it's like some sacrificial ritual or whatever, and now to add on to that time dilation, it's cool to see this high concept explored kind of like one piece at a time. And for me, having a whole issue dedicated to this kind of time dilation thing was really exciting and very different than the previous issues that we had gotten.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you think about his interactions with some of the different characters? I mean, specifically like the Fantastic Four and the Cap interactions. I mean, I feel like they both got a lot of attention, for better or for worse, from people following this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of criticisms of it. Like, these are his friends. Wouldn't they kind of hear him out? I like the whole concept of like Peter on the run from the government. Like I think that's just a good place for the character generally.
Yeah, we never really got it in long form during like Back in Black and the Civil War era. Like I always felt like there was more to be mined from that they didn't go there. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, it kind of bums me out that like by issue 1 that seems to have been sorted out, or maybe not. We'll come to find out. But like there's not everybody knows Peter's identity, but he doesn't seem to be like being super secretive as Spider-Man, which would imply that like he's not being chased after by the government still. But I've always wanted to see that as like a more long form story, like you said, Back in Black. For me, the greatest disappointment, I mean, there's a lot of disappointments around One More Day, but one of the biggest disappointments of that era is that like the story they set up to take him on the run with MJ, after Aunt May's death, could have been a really exciting, very different path to take the character down, to see him like fleeing New York and on the run from the government and maybe angrier and it all on the line. Like, it's a bummer we never got those stories. Like, I would love to see a what if that explored that. But I do think that, like, with the shortened page count, if there was one page I'd want to add to this comic, it would be like a page of newscasters talking about the explosions in Pennsylvania, just to establish the stakes of that a little more clearly. Because like we have the people saying, and I think it's fine the way it's done. Like they say like there were 2 like extra dimensional nuclear bomb level explosions outside Pennsylvania. Like that's why we need to talk to you. But I can understand why that might not be enough to satisfy people to believe that like the FF and Cap wouldn't give Spider-Man the benefit of the doubt. But it worked for me. Like there's a certain amount of like you got to buy into the concept because it's comics, and I bought into it. Especially in the era of like New York right now is very anti-hero after the Kingpin reign. So I'm like, okay, I would understand why the government would knuckle down and the heroes would be questioning things a little bit more. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, like, I got to be honest. Like, I mean, I saw some of the criticism of it, but I really didn't find it to be as much of a case of suspension of disbelief, even as you suggest. And I know you're not suggesting like, oh, you had to like completely like close your eyes and go with it, but like, I don't know, like to me, like it made sense. I mean, yes, there was this extra dimensional explosion that was like, the size of a nuke or something, like, or whatever the heck it was, but also like, I mean, like thing in Johnny where like, yeah, we just got to make sure you're who you say you are. Like, I mean, like, we're about to get a TV show about Secret Invasion in a couple of months. I mean, like again, like, yeah, it's comics, and sometimes you got to just go with it. But also, it's comics, and what have we seen in comics before? Sometimes it's a Skrull. Sometimes it's Dr. Octopus as Peter Parker. You know what I mean? Like, like you can't. And the same with Cap. I mean, Cap was just kind of like, I'm here as law and order here, but like, I know you're stressed, you're out of your mind. Let's just like pause and mow. Let's just sort through this. And, Peter then, smashed his face with the shield. And, that's just not going to set anybody right. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. Like, to me, like, I know that this story has some very valid criticism, not necessarily this comic, but the overall story has some very valid criticism to me. But, like, in terms of, like, oh, who's in character, who's not in character, I mean, like, when you put circumstances together, like, obviously from Peter's standpoint, there's I feel like there is a permission structure for him to not be acting as his best self right now. His girlfriend is the love of his life is stuck in another dimension with someone who's about to sacrifice her. You know what I mean? Like, that's
right.
Like, I would not expect him to be at his most rational and calm. And
no, and the comic explores that too, right? There's that great image of him from Slightly Below where he's explaining like a crazy mathematician in another dimension. Like okay, it's the FF. If anybody would go along with that, it'd be the FF. Right. But like, that panel is written in a way to make Peter seem like a crazy person.
Right. But the fact is, no one is saying to him, we don't believe you. They're just saying, like, they don't understand because they have not been in his shoes. They don't necessarily understand just the level of tension and drama that's happening here. They just know that like something weird is happening. There's been an explosion. We just got to sort through this. So like, I don't know. Like, to me, this is not a leap. I don't see this as a leap. I really don't. I mean, like, I took this at face value, and then when I reread it, because when I reread it, I had that criticism in the back of my mind. I'm like, let me look for this to make sure like I wasn't glossing over this on the first read. And on my second read, I was like, no, like this all feels like it fits from a character standpoint. Like, nothing, like. And then I feel like, people like Aunt May are, kind of called Peter out on being out of character. You know what I mean? Like, like right. for the moments that, this isn't you, like, so I don't know, like everything from a character standpoint, everything felt aligned and everyone I felt was acting as they should be acting given the circumstances. So like, I just don't really see that rabbit hole jumping down that and exploring much more of it. So.
Well, let's not respond to people who aren't us, because we both agree on that matter.
Right,
and like,
right.
if I really wanted to no prize it, like with the Cap thing, right? Because he doesn't fight the FF, he just leaves, right?
Right.
The Cap thing, like, he knows, if we're gonna go back to Civil War, right? Like, that Cap is gonna plant his feet like a tree, and
right.
and he's not gonna convince this guy otherwise, right? Like, Cap says 1 or 2 days, he's gonna go by the book,
Yeah.
And so like. Peter does what he best thinks he can do to get out of that situation, which is to like demonstrate it through force. And I totally believed it. And not only did I believe it, I also thought it was super cool. Like, cool to see Peter standing up for himself and asserting himself in this way. And
right.
He's a problematic guy. We all know Peter rushes into situations without thinking, and sometimes like half-cocked, if you will. And, you put him in the ultimate pressure cooker, which is Mary Jane, like you said, in trouble. This story is a story right now about what lengths Peter is willing to go to save Mary Jane.
Right.
And again, not responding to people who aren't us. Like, this is a story all about that relationship and how precious it is to Peter, whatever the outcome is. We don't know what the outcome is.
Right.
So making those scenes so great is the art. Mm-hmm. I wanted to commend this issue for the art. I think this is some of Romita's best stuff. Whether or not you choose to accept Peter's beat up face,
right.
That's a choice. I mean, it is a capital C choice.
Right.
And if you don't like that, I totally get it. It is weird.
Yeah.
I like it. So I'm going to go with it. and I respect him making a choice and sticking with it. It is not. I've seen a lot of people say like, oh, he draws so poorly. It's like, no, he knows how to draw a human face. This is him choosing to do something different, and it totally works for me. It sells me on Peter's harried attitude. There's so much to commend about the art here. I just wanted to address that because I get that people are going to be like, what is with that face?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like, it's a choice, but it's a choice that's consistent. It's a choice that, yes. This is, like I said, you said it best. There's like, you're either with it or you're not with it. I was with it as well. And again, like, you can't talk about a book being tense and moving fast without having the art, be completely in sync in that way. And that's what we got in this book. I mean, like you said, like, despite the kind of haphazardness of the story, Peter's frame of mind and not knowing which way was up or what day it is or what year it is or whatever it is, there's such a flow of motion, it's funny to talk about this in a comic that has a very prominent scene with Captain America in it, but like what I was thinking of was kind of this scene, this comic as a whole reminded me of the scene in The Winter Soldier where Cap is making the escape from the SHIELD headquarters, and he's like, he's on the motorcycle and he's jumping onto the plane, and it's like, to me, it's like I always talk about that scene as being like, that's one of the few times I feel like the MCU truly captures like a comic book tension in motion. Like, it's like everything is just like such in flow from panel to panel to panel to panel, and that's what Romita does here. Except it's actually a comic, so it makes sense. But it's like it's the highest form of it. You know what I mean? Like how do you capture that level of dynamic motion and flow to thing to thing to thing? Because like you said, from a plot standpoint, there's not a ton that happens in this comic. It's just going, it's beat to beat to beat to beat, and the art just carries it from page to page to panel to panel. I mean, like, there's not a wasted page or panel in this whole comic.
Yeah, I love his just his panel choices. We try to talk about art on the show more, and sometimes I don't have the language for it, but like someone like John Romita Jr. makes it so easy to talk about his art, because it's like, I say this about Spielberg's work too, which is when you watch it, what he's doing seems so obvious, like, oh, that's obviously the right choice for this, but there's something genius in its simplicity. Like of course it should be that, but like it takes a master to highlight why that is the perfect choice. It's easy to spot a perfect choice because it's perfect. And here, like, things like the boxy 6-panel pages, when there's a lot of movement, it moves quickly. The images don't invite you to spend a lot of time with them. Whereas like when something really gets in Peter's way, like the introduction of the Human Torch and the Thing, or Cap, we get the full page spreads that invite you to look around the page, and they feel like these big forces that are in the way of Peter. And then it speeds back up again with smaller panels, and horizon lines become Dutch angles to make you feel unsettled. And there's a scene of Peter climbing down a building without his Spider-Man costume on, and the angle of the building keeps shifting, and it makes you feel really like ill, and gives you some of that vertigo of what it would mean for Peter to move through Manhattan quickly. Or like as he's swinging, like he's not swinging like full bodied, like he is in a horizontal line, like he is parallel with the ground, because he's hurling himself so quickly through the air. It just emphasizes how much he's pushing himself, like that he himself has become an arrow, of some sort. And like all of that, I think, is just so brilliantly captured on the page. There's great action, quick movements in panel, like when his hand collapses and it springs onto Captain America in a sort of like transparent shadow. I cannot gush enough about the images in this comic.
Awesome. Anything else in terms of just the visual stylings of this book you want to hit on before we take a quick break?
I think we take it for granted Joe Caramagna's contributions to the books. He's just been on it for so long. It's almost perfunctory that we say his name, even if we don't get it right for most of the time that we're saying it. But like an issue like this makes it really obvious how much care he can put into something when he has the time to do it. Like his text layouts perfectly go along with the way JR has like laid out his page. It's just so smooth. Like I would challenge any comic creator or somebody who wants to get into comics to go through this book and draw a red line about how the image is guiding your eye through the page. And Joe and JR are a perfect team for this. But there's a lot of like other font choices here, like bent word bubbles to indicate that the person was either cut off or change their inflection or attitude. There's like canted text boxes and like big brashy sound effects. Like this is a great example of like, I would show this book to anybody studying lettering. And you know, just to also shout out Menyz, like we see the passage of time through the day. It starts at the dawn of the day, and we end at the sunset. And you know that also further emphasize how much time is passing. And I love it when a colorist can like add some real world grounded realism, especially in a book all about time. So anyway, this is a AAA art comic book. I think this is one of Marvel's best teams of artists at the current moment, and it's what I want from comics. You know, like this is a comic book. And I can't say enough. This one blew me away with the art, and I think it's one of the best ones we've gotten yet in this run, which I think is a run full of great art.
All right. Well, why don't
Sorry for my soapbox, but I feel very passionately about the art in this comic.
All right. Well, why don't we talk about the other place where, you know, Dan, you can go on and on and on about art, which is, of course, our Slack. Hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what the heck's been happening in the Slack this week?
Well, Mark, this week in the Slack, I don't think there's really much we can talk about other than, like, you know, obviously there's been a lot of talk about these comics, but, like, man, that Across the Spider-Verse trailer dropped this week. And not only are people picking it apart, but we're all so excited about that and talking about that movie and our favorite things from the trailer. You know, our excitement for seeing Mayday on screen. I got to tell you, Mark, I don't know how you felt with the trailer, but like both these trailers have already made me cry just watching them. Like, yeah. I can't say that I've ever experienced that with a trailer before, and maybe I'm just too caught up in it all. You know, famously, like the first movie convinced me to have a child. So I probably have a little too much like built into this, but these trailers have been just fascinating and beautiful, and I can't wait to see them elevate the art form even further. Do you have any thoughts on the trailers?
I mean, just to reiterate what you just said, I mean, yeah, it's. I think if there was any concerns that. Let me rephrase that. Not that I felt that the sequel was going to be like a cash grab or something like that, but like if there were any concerns that maybe the same amount of thought and just kind of emotional tremor or tenor was going to be different in this sequel, so far the trailers have put that to rest for me. I mean, like this looks like it's going to be every bit is locked into the mythology and of this character of this universe as the first movie was. So I'm very excited by it.
Yeah, my fear was always that like the first one flew under the radar, and now that it won an Academy Award, all of the muckety muck higher ups are going to try to get their fingers in it,
right.
And being split into two parts was kind of terrifying for me because that seems to like emphasize like the bloat that a lot of like studio driven things and money driven things are doing. But like so far the trailers have really worn their heart on their sleeve enough to make me emotional watching them. And to be honest, like I'm excited about seeing all the spider people, but I suspect that those are just going to be one or two sequences and the rest of the movie is going to really be about who this character is and where his heart takes him. and the trailers have restored my faith, ever be it lacking, for these projects. And we've been talking about it in the Slack. So anyway, join in on the fun. Come join our amazing Slack. There's a link in the description of this episode that'll let you sign up in less than a minute. And we hope to see you there. We're approaching 1,000 people in the Slack. So, come be one of those people.
Awesome.
All right, Mark. So this comic snuck in an obligatory Mets reference. Not just any Mets reference, a sort of joking acknowledgement about how terrible the Mets are as a team. And I thought I would allow you this platform as a maybe self-loathing Mets fan to talk about the Mets and Peter's relationship to the Mets and this comic's relationship to the Mets. Mark, did you have anything to say about that moment?
Well, I mean, Dan, you're talking to someone who, bought a Sunday ticket package this past year, not realizing that his first Sunday game of the year was going to be Easter Sunday. So, instead of doing stuff with my extended family yesterday, my wife, son, and I were, at Citi Field, very cold because it was like just kind of, just had a nice little chill in the air in New York yesterday, and just in general, and they were down 6-0 early. I mean, just a typical miserable Mets day. So
wouldn't have it any other way.
I always do take umbrage with people like to share that clip from the Family Guy where it's opening day and it's the first pitch and they say the season is over. See, that's incorrect because the Mets actually have the best opening day record in all of baseball. So that's the thing. It's opening day is the pinnacle usually for the Mets. It's then everything that comes after that's always like the pain and the suffering. And so I you know what, like the fact that this comic came out like in the middle of like opening week and stuff like that. I mean, come on, Nick Lowe, like what are you doing? Like you haven't kicked me enough when it comes to this kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot to say. The Mets kind of got me down a little bit this year. I just don't think they got the same spark they had last year. It's just, I don't know what to say, Dan. It's just like, I mean, of course, in a comic where Peter is like at his nadir, they're going to just like, rub in a Mets suck reference as well. So like, screw you, Marvel. How about that? Screw you, Marvel.
There's no time for anything. But we'll always take time to knock the Mets while they're down.
Yeah,
that seems to be the mantra here.
I mean, at least like who? I'm trying to remember. There was some creator that like put him with the Yankees, and I was just like, what is this? Like, it was probably J.J. Abrams or something. I don't know, but anyway.
Well, I wanted to return back to the thing you were talking about at the top of the episode, which is this whole, like, as this goes on, you seem to be sold more and more on the mystery box approach. And, and the whole idea of what did Peter do? And I completely agree with you. I mean, I think I was more in a wait and see, but I think this is really paying off wonderfully. And I feel like the more time that goes on that we don't meet this exact moment of what did Peter do, because I think, yes, stuff is bad right now, but I don't think we still have seen the thing that puts them all on the outs. Like, yes, he like got into the FF kind of and Cap, but they all seemed pretty forgiving of Peter and his situation. And so like, you're like, okay, that's bad, but something is going to happen that is way worse than this. What could that possibly be that the book is like, is guiding us that Peter is ultimately driven to do? Like, what extent could he be pushed to do something that this whole book would fixate it on? And the longer that goes and the more we see even like microaggressions that aren't that, the more it makes me think that that thing is monumental, and it builds up my excitement for it. Will it ultimately be worth it in the end? I don't know, but I tend to think, given the record so far, that Wells knows what that is and has been very clear about that in his mind from the beginning. And I hope that he has judged his audience correctly, because so far I'm finding this very thrilling.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what what is the most significant about this is the fact that I feel like Wells is paying off everything that he seeded, especially in that first arc. Way back. What was that? About a year ago now. At this point, like time's a flat circle. But I think that's why it's working. Like, and frankly, with other mysteries with other creators over the last couple of years, and I mean, going back all 10 years of our show, frankly, I just don't feel like they. No. Granted, we're not at the finale yet. So, like, I right. say this with now 2/3 of this story in the can, but I feel like we are starting, like you said, the microaggressions and whatnot. We're starting to see all of the ground that was seeded and the groundwork that was laid is being paid off bit by bit by bit, and it's all making sense now. To the point where, like, now I really want to see, like, what's the deal. I want to see what he actually did, not because it's just like, get on with it already, but now it's like, oh man, okay, so if he did this and that's not the thing yet, what's the thing gonna be? Because that's what's, like you said, what's even worse than this. And like, even with, like, I was speaking with someone on it was either Twitter or the Slack or something about the Norman Osborn stuff, and it was like I still don't believe over the long haul that this Norman Osborn Peter alliance is going to be a status quo that gets maintained. You know what I mean? Like, no. I feel that this is an alliance that is made to be broken, and it's going to be broken probably in a very tragic for Peter way, because that's just how it is. It can't go differently. But like, to kind of see how this is now starting to come together, like I was kind of, as we saw it in the earlier issues, I was fascinated from okay, that's a choice. Let's see where they go with that. But now that we're starting to see, like, where that is being, where that groundwork is laid, I'm like, okay, I want to see more of this. I'm about to assume that the opening of the next issue is going to be a lot of Peter and Norman, and it's going to answer a lot of those questions. So, like, so that's where it's working for me. I mean, like, I think, I was admittedly scarred, and you warned me from the onset that, when they opened this whole arc with a mystery, I was just like, okay, like, we keep getting mysteries, and they're really not paying off, and I'm not feeling they're being rewarding. And it's like you said, Zeb Wells clearly has everything scripted out. He knows what the finish is. Like, this is not, we're not playing improv here. We're not playing jazz. I'm going to do a jazz metaphor for you. So the like it or don't, like, he knows where this is going, and this story proves that to me. Like, it's like, okay, like, he, one way or another, like, this is all going to crescendo in a way that makes sense, because that's the way this man has clearly been writing it. So, okay, I don't know if that rambly rant made any sense, but you
no,
go.
No. And I think the reason I was, like, kind of more confident in the beginning was, I read it as a guy that was really choosing his words very specifically. Like, all the descriptions and all of the scenes in the first few issues were very specific. Like, there was, like, obviously it's meant to make you feel unsettled in some way. Like, why is it like this? But it wasn't just, like, vague, things are different now. It was, like, a very specific type of different that suggests, like, there's a series of events that are going to get us to this point. Not to say other writers have made stuff up as it goes, but it felt very specific to me and very controlled. And ultimately we're going to see, but, like, he's got my confidence so far. One of the things I am concerned about, though, is, like, I do say I'm excited for this whole what did Peter do in finding out that big choice. But I do want to acknowledge the what did Peter do of it all is a marketing thing, right? Mm-hmm. That has not appeared in the pages of the comic, right? Like that is something that they were using to market issue 1 with that scene at the start of issue 1. Now, we have seen the marketing team not be completely aligned with the product team, you know, and so I do worry that, like, if we buy into the marketing too much, you know, and far be it from me to be the guy that's like, don't buy into the marketing, you know, but because that's normally my deal. But you know, I do want to let this story play out, and if there is no big like, what did Peter do? Acknowledge that that's not a promise the writer has made. That's a promise the marketing team has made.
Right. Well, I mean, I'll only push back on that to the degree of, like, no, those words themselves have not showed up. But, like, you know, if you go back to that first issue, there was clearly something Peter did that put him at odds with so many of his core supporting characters. And clearly something that he did that caused him to no longer be with Mary Jane, and for Mary Jane to be with another man with children, you know what I mean? So so in that regard, he did do something, but like,
yeah.
And we don't know what he did, you know? So like, I get what you're saying, but like, yeah, I don't feel like the story is going to end with someone, you know, the narrative box coming across being like, and that is what Peter did. You know what I mean? Like,
what Peter did was the friends we made along the way.
Exactly. Right. With great doing comes what Peter did. I mean, I don't know. That's all I wanted to just kind of clarify on that. So,
well, on that note, do you think this is a point of confusion for me? Have we seen the moment from the start of issue 1 already? Like, my expectation was that this issue would start with that moment, right? Of him in a smoking crater, holding the device, his costume torn up. But it didn't. It started with him burying the costume. So, like, are we meant to believe that that moment took place in between these comics? Or is that a moment that is yet to happen? That has me a little confused, and maybe that's intentional. I don't know. Like, is he going to repeat something that looks very similar and cause another explosion? But, like, in my mind, that moment we've passed already, and it was just off page. But it's weird for it to not replay that image in some way.
Yeah, I mean, we still don't know. I mean, to your question, we still don't know 100% how time is working in this other dimension. Yeah. And like you said, like I don't know. I'm out of the speculation business, Dan. You know that.
I mean, it's not even like a speculation more than like, do you read it that way, or or am I right to question this?
I think you're right to question it, but I also feel like we really don't have all the information. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't make a presumption on anything just yet. You know what I mean? Like you know, like I would put a pin in that thought, because maybe something was
who knows?
Was just created incorrectly or unveiled incorrectly initially, but like, we just don't know yet. You know what I mean? Like, we still got, and these next 2 issues are going to be larger than usual issues, correct?
Yes, they are. I believe 25 and 26 are double sized.
Okay. So this is 3 more parts, right? Or is this 2 more parts? I keep.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe 24 and 25 are double sized. You're probably right that it's that. Because
24 would probably be Legacy 725, right? So
you're
that's
right,
there's your marketing. Anyway, I not 725, 925. Sorry, I'm 200 issues away.
Oh no, Mark, that's where we started this show. What? Time warp. You've been in Zabalba.
I know, right? But I mean, look, it's a valid question, Dan. I just there's a part of me that's like, I'm not gonna jump on that yet, because we can comics, we can undo all that in a heartbeat if it's like, but now there's time travel and he's going back, but this is happening instead. And, anyway, it's just
I'm totally okay with it happening off page and just having you have to fill in the blanks with what you know before. I just was unsure if I was intentionally supposed to read it that way. That was unclear to me. So speaking about things from issue 1, I actually thought it was really cool in this issue. The parallelism that's set up with the first issue, like we revisit all the people that Peter was on the outs with in issue 1 in the exact same order, right? So we see him with Randy and kind of shrugging Randy off and running out of the apartment. We see him with Aunt May and the kind of fracturing of that relationship in some way. And, ultimately, and we see him with the Fantastic Four, so that's the exact sequence that we got in issue 1. And we see kind of like the kernels that set up like why that relationship is the way it is and how much further they have to go to get us back to where we started with in issue 1. And I thought that it's definitely intentional, this parallelism back to that issue. But I want to ask you about the Aunt May scene because, we see her picking up Peter's debt, and how much it might actually be. But then there's a moment where like that takes you back to the end of issue 1 where she kind of like has this kind of knowing acknowledgement that Peter is lying to her. And here, like, we get all the evidence for why she might believe that. Like, here's a Peter that like has a physical prowess that we've not seen. He's attacking Norman. He looks beat up. Like, if there was ever a moment for MJ to suspect that Peter was involved in superheroics or whatever, I mean, talk about ammunition. Like, I won't say whether or not I feel like we're going to go back to the Peter outing himself to Aunt May thing. But, I thought this was really an interesting scene, like, because it's very rare that Peter is that unhinged in front of Aunt May.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's just, it speaks to just how unhinged he is in general. I mean, like, I don't feel there is a parallel for Peter being in this state of mind. You know what I mean? Like he is separated by a dimension following an extraordinary explosion after fighting a god from the love of his life. So like I just don't, I don't know what you would compare that to. I don't know. I mean, like, when Norman killed Gwen Stacy, I mean, it was like the one and only time Peter almost like very willingly killed someone by his own hand, and then he, stops himself, and that, like, he had that moment of recognition in the last second. I feel like right now, like, in terms of his desperation and despair, we're close to that right now. You know what I mean? So we just don't know.
Yeah, I love the little details in the scene, like when Norman puts his hand on Peter's shoulder as like a sort of calm down kind of thing, and Peter shrugs it off. And if you look on the hand, there's like a watch, and the idea that like Peter, even looking at the calming presence of a hand, sees that time is ticking by, I think is a really like clever inclusion on the panel. To close off my thoughts on this, and I'm curious here if you have anything you want to add, but like whatever Peter did clearly has to do with Norman, whether it's breaking Norman's window again, if that's the great sin, poor Oscorp windows. But I found it interesting in the final image that like Peter walks in on Norman working on something. And if you look closely, like it seems to be like a turbine of some sort. And throughout the run in the future, we see that Norman is working with like Kamala on like a giant turbine of some kind, or a plane, or whatever it is. And to see it here makes me think that detail is very intentional, or at least as a way to demarcate time, right? Like we got a turbine, and then later on we have like what looks seeming to be a bigger plane feature. And it just makes me think there's something going on in the background with Norman and whatever he's building that is like entirely separate from all of this, that is yet to pay off. And it's cool to see it be so deliberate. Like
Yeah.
I don't know if you read that item the same way that I did, but to me, looking at it, it very clearly looks like a turbine.
Yeah, I don't think I looked at it as clearly as you did. I will point out though, because my own rant got me thinking. I did just think of the parallel of like when Peter goes after Norm and he's like pushing him against the wall, a la his death in Amazing Spider-Man 122. So anyway,
Yeah, that's true.
I appreciated that kind of callback to like it was just a nice little callback there. Anyway, do you want to give this thing some grades? Or wait, there is one more star of this comic. Do you want to touch on it, Dan?
Well, I will. In the back of this issue was another letter printed by Nick Lowe from me that I've gotten 2 letters in recently. The reason I wanted to kind of point this one out is like, as much as Mark and I get called shills for this run, I wrote a very negative letter in about the dark web. But the key thing to it is that the letter was negative, but it was respectful, saying why that story disappointed me. And, it wasn't writing in to criticize the comic. It was writing in to ask a question, which is to say, like, can you talk to me about the process via which these comics are being made? Because it feels like I'm reading, multiple different books at once, or a comic that doesn't believe in itself entirely. And Mark and I were very critical on the dark web storyline and some of the other tie-ins here that aren't JRJR stuff. And, anyway, I don't want to go into a whole rant about Spider-Man Twitter, but like we started the show to kind of model what we thought would be better behavior by engaging with the artist in a respectful manner, that everybody is trying their hardest to make good comics, and we don't always know what they're up against or why they make the choices that they do. And so that's why I was writing in to see, like, can you peel back the curtain for us so that we can understand? And I thought Nick's letter in response to mine was respectful and honest without betraying his team. I mean, that's an editor's job, right, is to be supportive. And it wouldn't be great if he just wrote in like, yeah, I was disappointed in those stories too. Like, that would be a bad thing for an editor to do.
Yeah,
you know?
No, you don't do
but,
that.
Yeah, instead he said, like, look, like, Spider-Man comics can be funny, and I thought it was funny. And that comes down to taste. And to be honest, my letter was drowned out by other letters that thought Dark Web was really fun and entertaining. So I won't claim to have the sole opinion on Dark Web. Does it seem to be echoed by a lot of people? And Mark, you as well? Sure. So I know some people probably read my letter and were like, oh, cool, that reflects my opinion on this. But also, Nick was really nice to say, like, I appreciate the readers and people like you holding me to task. Like, if you don't like something, let me know. But that's to say, I wanted to mention it because I hope that it could model a way of reasonably interacting with these people if you don't like the stories that they're telling. Because, not every story is going to be for everybody. And I think they should hear it if we're not enjoying something. But they're not going to listen to you if you're an asshole. And my job was to try to not be an asshole. Anyway, this might be a lot of patting myself on the back, but it seemed to have elicited a good response in the back of the book. And so I hope to keep kind of like putting that behavior and attitude out there, for anybody reading the comic.
Who's the asshole now? My God.
I know. Anyway, enough of like me filleting myself, but
we're going PG-13 on this pod. I love it.
Yeah, that's it. You know what? We're about an hour into this, so complain away. Like this is where we bury the R-rated content, and
this is where the Slack sees Mark's cues of like, we've been doing this for an hour, Dan. Can we finish now? Let's do some.
All right. Well, then I'll let you cap it off, Mark. What grade are you giving this thing?
I am going to give this an A-. It's a high A-, but it's an A-. How about you, Dan?
I'm giving this a solid A. This was a really, really fun comic. I don't have any reservations about it. I had a great time reading this.
I did too. I need to, now we need to stick the landing. So like, like this is a great middle chapter for sure. So.
Awesome. And normally middle chapters are where things start going off the rails. So,
right.
Yeah. I did want to address one thing really quickly before we signed off here tonight, which is the coverage of the proper Spider-Man book by Dan Slott and Mark Bagley. We had talked back with issue 1. Mark and I were saying we don't really feel like this is the title that we've elected to cover on this show, and yet, a big name like Dan Slott and an even bigger name, frankly, for me, Mark Bagley, would normally command our attention and coverage. And we said that we would check back in at the end of the first arc if we felt like, hey, this book is actually like a really big deal, and maybe we should be covering it in some way alongside Amazing Spider-Man. And Mark, I got to say, at the end of this Spider-Verse storyline, I still don't feel like this is like a proper main title Spider-Man book. It is. I mean, we said it last time. This is as Dan Slott a book as it comes. And for all the pluses and minuses of that, and frankly, I think this is, if I'm being really honest, I think some of his weakest work he's ever done, despite the additional time and the Spider-Boy appearances. I will say I liked issue 5 a good deal. But it's not enough for me to go, Mark and I need to cover this month to month. And, if it ends up being really full of substance, maybe we talk about it every arc. But it's not like, if you're coming here for our coverage of that, I think we're skipping out on it. Mark, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, look, full disclosure, I'm not a huge fan of this book right now. It's I outside of the two animated, the one animated movie and hopefully the sequel, I'm not really a big Spider-Verse person anyway. I just don't love the concept attributed to Spider-Man. So the fact that this first arc has been so heavily in that mythology, and I understand why from a marketing standpoint, and why Dan Slott would be the one to do it from a Marvel editorial standpoint, but it's just it's not scratching an itch for me by any stretch. And then on top of that, all I will say in a attempt to be conciliatory is just hey, look, it. If it's anything, it is a clear alternative to the kind of stories we're getting in Amazing Spider-Man right now. I mean, this is, to me, these two books are nothing alike in terms of style and tone and the kinds of stories they want to tell right now. Even when we're talking about a quote-unquote extra-dimensional explosion in Amazing Spider-Man right now, they just feel completely different in terms of style and tone.
I mean, Dan Slott's book is the most secret scrollsy book I think I've ever read. And that's just not Mark and I's jam. Right.
So look, if you want an alternative, that's certainly a book for you. But we have long kind of, I don't want to say prided ourselves, but I think for the sake of our sanity and our ability to fulfill our duties as podcast hosts, have kind of stuck to reviewing the main, what we refer to as the main book, which is Amazing Spider-Man. And perhaps if this Activeless book was gonna maybe be very complimentary in that regard, we could be convinced otherwise, but it's not. It's its own flavor, it's its own thing, and I don't foresee a reason for us to have to do it. I'm sure we could tweet about it or write about it in the Slack. I mean, maybe one day we'll start talking about B books as collectively again, but not here and now. I don't think so. Anyway,
and that's not to say there's not exciting things in the future. We got it's being sold as a grounded arc against Electro coming up next.
Right.
So I'm curious to see if Dan Slott still has it in him to do a grounded Spider-Man story.
Right.
All puns aside, I don't understand this appeal to Spider-Boy yet, and I'm willing to let that play out. But nothing about that has sold me on the idea of that character. So I'm still on wait and see for the Spider-Man title. I'm reading it, but I don't feel like Mark and I could be compelled to talk about it for any longer than we're going to talk about it today, which is probably already too long. So, Mark, why don't you take us home?
Of course. Well, it is that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same weeks the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. Thank you again to everyone who already supports us in the work that we do. Plus, we want to issue a special thank you and welcome our newest patrons, Cody Wilson and Chris Sutcliffe.
Thank you both. To download our earliest episodes, including interviews with legendary creators like J.M. DeMatteis, Tom DeFalco, Ron Frenz, Mark Bagley, and many, many more, subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
So, Mark, until the Mets win the pennant, what's our motto?
Et tu, Dan. With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.